In the fall of 1991, a stockroom clerk in Akron, Ohio, counted 41 pairs of Air Jordan 5s before his shift even started. By lunch, there were 6 left. That was the whole thing. Not the shoe itself, but the wait for the shoe. I worked a counter like that one, 3 years later and 4 states over, and I can tell you the wall meant more than the box ever did. 15 pairs of shoes are about to walk through this video. Every one of them came with a mall, a layaway slip, and a kid who thought his whole life would change once he had them on. Some of them did. Nothing was wasted back then. Not the box, not the tissue paper, not the extra laces rattling in the little plastic bag. We let it go anyway, eventually. All of it. The stores, the wall, the ritual. This is what we lost, one pair at a time. Number 1. The Air Jordan 5. Released in 1990, the year the sneaker stopped being a shoe and became a rumor you heard in homeroom. The reflective tongue caught the gym lights just right, and every kid in that hallway knew exactly whose foot it was on before they saw the face. Number 2. The Reebok Pump. 1989 into the early 90s, the shoe you inflated like a blood pressure cuff at your own ankle. Half the kids who owned one never actually pumped it right. They just liked the sound it made in a quiet classroom. Number 3. The LA Gear Light-Up Shoe. A small miracle of AA batteries and bad wiring that somehow survived recess. You stomped harder than you needed to. Everyone did. That was the whole point of owning them. Number 4. The Nike Air Max 90. And I want you to notice the visible air bubble in the heel, because in 1990, that was practically science fiction. People held their foot up in the aisle of the store just to look through it, like it was an X-ray of something important. These 4 alone could start a fight in a school cafeteria. And they did, more than once. But you didn't buy these shoes at a website. You bought them at a specific kind of building, and that building mattered as much as the shoe. The mall shoe store in 1993 smelled like new rubber, carpet glue, and the particular ozone of 100 fluorescent tubes running at once. There was a wall of boxes behind glass, stacked by size, and a kid working the register who was maybe 19 and treated like a customs officer. You pointed. He climbed a little ladder. That was the transaction, and it took 10 minutes because he had to check 3 sizes before your foot ever went in. Number 5. The Converse Chuck Taylor. Already 60 years old by the time the 90s needed it again, this time under a flannel shirt instead of a basketball uniform. It was cheap. That was the whole appeal in a decade that pretended not to care about money while caring about it constantly. Number 6. The Vans Old School. The side stripe shoe that belonged to a kid with a skateboard under one arm and scraped knees under both pant legs. It wasn't sold at the same store as the basketball shoes. That mattered. Where you bought it told you who you were before you said a word. Number 7. The Fila Grant Hill. A shoe named for a rookie who hadn't won anything yet, sold entirely on the promise of what he might become. That's a strange thing to sell a 12-year-old. Potential. But it worked, and it worked because the whole decade ran on potential. Layaway. Say that word to anyone who bought sneakers before 1998 and watch their face change. You put $5 down. The clerk wrote your name on a slip and slid the box into a back room you were never allowed to see. 6 weeks later, if your mother's schedule allowed it, you came back and paid the rest in crumpled bills that smelled like a purse. Some kids never made it back. The shoes sat in that back room until the store returned them to stock, and nobody talked about it afterward. Number 8. The Nike Air Force 1. Older than the decade itself, but it was the 90s that turned it into a uniform instead of a shoe. Nothing about it changed. That was the trick. In a decade obsessed with the next thing, one shoe just refused to move. Number 9. The British Knights Dimacell. A shoe most people under 30 have never heard of, and that absence is exactly the point of this channel. It was the second shoe on the wall. Not the one everyone wanted, but the one everyone actually bought, because it cost $20 less. The famous shoes get remembered. The second-tier ones get forgotten entirely, and somebody has to say their name out loud again. Number 10. The Nike Air Huarache. Released in 1992, built out of neoprene like a wetsuit for your foot, which sounds insane until you tried it on. It hugged your ankle like nothing had before it. People described it the way you describe a good coat. That's not normal sneaker language. By 1994, the wall behind the counter had a hierarchy as strict as anything in a cafeteria, and everyone in that hallway knew exactly where they stood on it. Gym class was the trial. Everyone's shoes came off the rack at once, and the whole locker room turned into an unspoken inventory of who mattered. Number 11. The Adidas Superstar. The shell toe, worn without laces by kids who understood a shoe, could be a sentence if you styled it right. Number 12. The Nike Air Raid, built for basketball but adopted whole by hip-hop culture, which is a pattern that repeats through this entire decade. The shoe companies noticed. By 1995, they weren't chasing athletes anymore. They were chasing the kid on the corner, wearing them off the court entirely. Number 13. The Nike Air Diamond Turf, made for a football player named Deion Sanders, worn by kids who never touched a football in their life. That's the part people forget. Most of these shoes were bought by kids who had no interest in the sport attached to them. The sport was just the story printed on the box. What you were actually buying was a version of somebody else's confidence. Let's talk about where these things actually got sold, because the shoe stores of the 90s are as gone now as the shoes themselves. Foot Locker had the referee stripes on the wall clock. Athlete's Foot had the treadmill you were supposed to test the shoe on but never did, out of embarrassment. Champs had the loudest music and the youngest staff. Each store had its own personality, the way diners used to, before everything became the same three companies. Number 14. The Nike Air Jordan 11, released for the 1995 holiday season. The patent leather shoe that made grown men line up outside a mall at 4 in the morning. I was working that morning. We sold out in 11 minutes and spent the rest of the day telling people no. That's the part nobody puts in the highlight reel. Behind every iconic release is a clerk repeating the same sentence for 8 hours straight. Number 15. The Skechers Chrome Dome, or the Airwalk, or whichever mid-tier shoe your particular town decided was the one that mattered. Every city had its own 15th shoe. That's the truth nobody's list ever captures, because the list depends entirely on which mall you grew up walking through. That's 15. But the shoes were never really the story. The story is what happened around the counter while you waited for your size. You'd sit on a little bench, sock feet on the carpet, and a stranger's kid would be doing the exact same thing 4 feet away. There was a metal foot measuring device bolted to the floor. Half the kids in America stood on that thing at some point and never thought twice about it. It's a strange kind of intimacy, a stranger holding your ankle to check the fit. Retail used to require that kind of touch. Now you click a size and hope. By 1997, the arms race had a body count of its own. Sneaker theft was common enough that schools banned certain brands from gym class entirely. That's not nostalgia talking. That's a fact that got buried under the fonder memories, and it belongs in this story too. The shoes carried real weight, $140 in 1996 money, out of a household that might have brought home $400 a week. Parents fought about these shoes at kitchen tables across the country. It wasn't vanity. For a lot of families, it was the whole monthly budget balanced on one purchase. Working class families found ways around it. Layaway, birthday money pooled together. An older cousin's outgrown pair, cleaned with a toothbrush until it looked new. There was a whole economy of care built around keeping a shoe looking fresh, because a fresh shoe lasted socially even after it stopped lasting physically. Baby powder in the toe box to keep them from creasing overnight. A rubber band around the front while you slept. Kids invented a whole maintenance ritual with no instructions. Nobody taught you that. It passed kid to kid, hallway to hallway, the same way real folk knowledge always spreads. That's the part of this history that never makes it into a highlight reel of famous shoes. The ingenuity underneath the want. Then the malls started dying. Slowly at first, the way most institutions do, one anchor store closing and nobody replacing it. By 2005, half the shoe chains that built this whole culture had merged, shrunk, or vanished. The wall behind the counter went with them. The internet did the rest. Why wait for the ladder and the box and the clerk when you could just click and have it arrive at your door 2 days later? Efficient, correct in every practical sense, and it killed something that had nothing to do with efficiency at all. You don't get the wait anymore. You don't get the ladder, the clerk climbing it, the specific kind of hope that lived in those 10 minutes. Resale culture replaced it with something colder, a number on a screen instead of a kid's face when the box finally opened. The shoes are worth more now than they ever were then. Somehow, that makes them mean less. That's not a complaint about money. It's an observation about meaning and where meaning actually used to live in this country. It used to live in a specific building, at a specific counter, with a specific clerk who knew your shoe size before you said it out loud. This channel keeps returning to that kind of place. Not the icon everyone already covers, but the counter behind it, the version of the story with a name and an apron. That's why we go looking for the second tier, the British Knights instead of the Jordan, the athlete's foot instead of the flagship. That's where the real texture lives. Everybody remembers the shoe. Almost nobody remembers the store that sold it, or the kid behind the register, or the smell of the carpet. We remember it here because somebody has to keep the receipt. If you grew up in the 90s, you already know which one of these 15 was yours. You knew before I finished the sentence. Maybe it was the pump, maybe the Huarache, maybe some regional shoe I never even mentioned from a store that only existed in your town. That shoe is gone from the shelves now, but it's not gone from anywhere else. It's still sitting in a closet somewhere, half a size too small, never thrown out. Nobody throws these away. That's the tell. You keep the shoe long after your foot has changed because the shoe was never really about the foot. It was about the counter, the wait, the 10 minutes of hope before the box came open. That part doesn't come back, no matter how the shoe gets re-released. They re-release the shoe every few years now. Same colorway, same box art, sold through an app instead of a wall. It's the same shoe. It is not the same thing. We'll keep telling these stories here, one counter and one wall at a time, because somebody ought to remember exactly how it used to work. If there's a store like this you remember, tell us in the comments and we'll go looking for it. That's how this channel finds its next episode.